The silence of the void was a lie, a poetic fallacy for those who had never truly lived in it. Captain Eva Rostova knew the truth. Space was never silent. It was a cacophony of whispers, the thrum of the life support system circulating recycled air, the low-frequency hum of the Singularity Core bleeding containment fields, the distant, almost subliminal chatter of quantum-entangled comms arrays sifting through the dark for any signal, friendly or otherwise. Aboard the Terran Confederacy ship Strix, silence was the one sound that could mean death. For 3 weeks. Her Ghost-class vessel had been gliding through the Serpent's Veil, a treacherous nebula of ionized hydrogen and gravitic anomalies that played hell with sensors and made navigation a form of high-stakes guesswork. Her mission was simple in its description and impossible in its implications. Investigate a garbled distress call from a place that shouldn't exist. Outpost Chimera was a deep space biology station, its location classified even to most of Fleet Command. A ghost on the star charts. Its final, panicked broadcast had been a string of incoherent screams and weapon discharges, but a single, terrifyingly clear phrase had been looped by the comms officer on Luna before the signal died completely. "They're not dead. God help us. They're not dead." Everyone in the Confederacy knew who they were. The Cathar, an insectoid race of hive-minded predators who had swarmed out of the Galactic core 70 years ago, consuming entire worlds in a tide of chitin and claws. The Scythe War, they called it, because the Cathar had reaped civilizations like wheat. Humanity was almost one of them, pushed back to the Sol system, with Earth itself under siege. High Command had made a decision born of absolute desperation. They had deployed the HFY pathogen, a retrovirus designed to attack the Cathar's unique reproductive biology, rendering them sterile. It wasn't a weapon that killed. It was a weapon that erased a future. The war didn't end with a bang, but with a slow, agonizing whimper as the Cathar race withered on the vine, their hives falling silent one by one. It was a genocide hidden behind the clean. Clinical term, strategic species denial, a secret sin that had purchased humanity's survival and haunted its conscience ever since. Now, the Strix was hunting a ghost, sent to confirm whether the Confederacy's greatest fear had been realized. "Anything, Kai?" Rostova asked, her voice a low murmur that barely disturbed the quiet tension on the bridge. Her executive officer, Kalen Vance, shook his head while his youthful face etched with the strain of staring at a sensor display that was mostly static. "Nothing but gravitic ghosts and radiation phantoms." "Captain," he replied, his tone crisp and formal, "the Veil is living up to its reputation. If there's a station out here, it's either completely cold or the nebula is masking its signature." Kai was a product of the post-war generation, a top-of-his-class officer who saw the Confederacy as a bastion of order and law in a chaotic galaxy. He hadn't seen worlds burn. He hadn't stood on the glassed plains of New Eden or seen the Cathar warrior forms tear through a platoon in seconds. Rostova had. She had been a junior ensign during the final, bloody years, a witness to the horrors that had necessitated the HFY pathogen. That memory was a shard of ice in her soul, a constant reminder of what was at stake. "Keep sweeping," she ordered. "Jinx, how are we on approach?" At the helm, Warrant Officer Salloway, a grizzled pilot whose call sign, Jinx, was a grimly ironic tribute to her uncanny ability to fly through asteroid fields that should have shredded her fighter, grunted in response. "Easy as flying through a blender blindfolded, but we're on course. Another hour to the target coordinates. Assuming the coordinates were right. Assuming the station is still there. Assuming a lot of things. Captain!" Rostova allowed a small, tight smile. Jinx's cynicism was a comfort. a familiar anchor in the uncertainty of their mission. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the low hum of the bridge. "Captain, I believe I have something." It was Dr. Eris Thorne, the civilian xenobiologist who had been practically forced onto their crew by the Admiralty Science Council. He was a last-minute addition, his presence an unwelcome deviation from military protocol. Thorne was a man haunted by an academic obsession with the Cathar, seeing them not as monsters, but as a biological marvel, a perfect evolutionary machine. He stood at his own biosensor station, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that bordered on manic. "I'm filtering the nebula's background radiation through a resonance cascade model. There's a null point, a shadow where there shouldn't be one, a cold spot, approximately 2,000 kilometers ahead." Kai looked over, his skepticism plain. "A cold spot. It could be a rogue planetoid, a pocket of dense gas." "No," Thorne interrupted, his voice sharp with conviction. "The thermal gradient is too precise. The edges too defined. It's artificial. It has to be the station." Rostova studied Thorne for a long moment. She didn't trust him. His fascination with the species that had almost exterminated theirs felt unhealthy, morbid, but his expertise was undeniable. "Jinx, take us in, slow and silent, full stealth protocols." "I don't want so much as a whisper of an energy signature." The Strix complied, its advanced hull plating shifting to absorb incoming sensor waves, its heat emissions funneled into internal sinks. It was a predator in the dark, built for the hunt. An hour later, they saw it. Outpost Chimera hung in the void like a forgotten tombstone, a skeletal frame of modules and docking arms against the swirling, violent beauty of the nebula. It was dark, no running lights, no communication signals, no signs of life. The cold spot Thorne had detected was the complete absence of heat, a chilling void where a bustling research station should have been. The silence from the station was absolute, a profound emptiness that screamed of tragedy. "Well," Jinx muttered from the helm, "there she is. Looks about as inviting as a Cathar nursery. Kai, assemble the away team," Rostova commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Weapons hot, hard-sealed environment suits. I want Dr. Thorne with us. If this is about the Cathar, I want his eyes on it." Kai hesitated. "Captain, standard procedure dictates." "This mission is anything but standard. XO. Rostova cut him off, her gaze like steel. "Thorne goes. I'll lead the team. You have the bridge. And Kai," she added, her voice dropping lower, "if we are not back in 3 hours, or if you detect any sign of a Cathar vessel, you are to enact Protocol 0. No questions, no hesitation. You burn this entire system down to the last atom. Is that understood?" Kai swallowed hard, the color draining from his face. Protocol 0 was the Confederacy's ultimate sanction, a final, horrifying command to overload the ship's singularity core and turn it into a miniature supernova, sterilizing an entire star system. It was the legacy of the Scythe War, a scorched earth policy born from the terror of extinction. "Understood, Captain," he whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The journey from the Strix to the station's primary airlock was short and unnervingly quiet. The station's exterior was scarred and pitted, but not from weapons fire. It looked corroded, as if bathed in some potent acid. When they forced the outer airlock, the hiss of escaping atmosphere was the only sound. Inside, the emergency lights flickered intermittently, casting long, dancing shadows down the main corridor. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and something else, a sickly sweet, organic scent like rotting fruit. The scene before them was one of methodical carnage. Bodies of scientists and security personnel were everywhere, but they weren't torn apart or riddled with pulse rifle burns. They were desiccated, mummified husks still clad in their station uniforms, their faces frozen in masks of silent terror. It was as if every drop of moisture, every ounce of life, had been violently siphoned from their bodies. My God, Kai breathed, his hand tightening on his rifle. What could do this? Dr. Thorne, however, seemed not horrified but utterly captivated. He knelt beside one of the bodies, his gloved fingers tracing the strange patterns on the victim's skin. Incredible. It's not a predatory feeding pattern. It's cellular consumption. The organism was absorbed. He moved further down the corridor, his attention drawn to the walls. They were covered in a strange, chitinous resin, a dark, veiny growth that pulsed with a faint, internal bioluminescence, like the circulatory system of some great beast. The entire station was being slowly, methodically digested. They brought a specimen here, Thorne murmured, almost to himself, as he examined a shattered containment unit in the primary lab. The logs are corrupted, but none of the fragments are clear. They found a dormant Cathar drone on a derelict Hive ship, one of the last. They thought the ashfall pathogen had rendered it inert, a biological relic. They wanted to study it, to understand how the pathogen worked. They found the lead researcher's personal log in the station's command center, a flickering data pad clutched in the dried-out hands of what was once the station director. Her final entries were a descent into madness and terror. The Cathar specimen hadn't been inert. It had been gestating. The ashfall pathogen, the weapon designed to ensure their extinction, hadn't worked as intended. The virus had a flaw, a 1 in a trillion chance of not sterilizing its host, but instead triggering a radical, violent metamorphosis. It hadn't killed the Cathar, it had forced it to evolve. The researcher's last entry was a single, scrawled sentence. It's not a bug, it's a seed, and we are the soil. As Rostova read the words aloud, a low hum filled the room. The chitinous growths on the walls began to pulse faster, their bioluminescence brightening from a dull glow to an angry, blood-red throb. "It knows we're here," Thorne whispered, a look of ecstatic discovery on his face. He reached out a hand, his scientific curiosity overriding all sense of self-preservation. "This changes everything. This is a new form of life, an adaptation beyond." "Thorne, get back," Rostova yelled. But it was too late. The moment his glove made contact with the resinous wall, it flared with blinding light. All around them, the mummified bodies of the station's crew began to twitch, their limbs contorted at unnatural angles as the same chitinous material erupted from within, encasing their bodies in a biomechanical shell of dark, gleaming armor. Spindly, razor-sharp limbs unfolded from their backs, and their heads snapped up, their eyes glowing with the same malevolent red light as the walls. They were puppets, the dead crew reanimated, their bodies serving as hosts for the Hive's new consciousness. The attack was instantaneous and utterly silent. The reanimated corpses moved with a fluid, terrifying grace, their new limbs scything through the air. One of Rostova's security team screamed as a chitinous blade sliced through his suit and he was dragged into the darkness. "Fall back to the shuttle, now!" Rostova shouted, firing her pulse rifle. The energy bolts hit the creatures, but they barely seemed to register the impact. their advance relentless and coordinated. They fought their way back through the corridors, the station itself now feeling like the throat of some great beast trying to swallow them whole. As they scrambled into their shuttle and blasted away from the docking port, they looked back. The transformation was accelerating. Outpost Chimera was no longer a station. It was writhing, pulsing, the chitinous growth spreading over its hull, reshaping it into a grotesque, organic vessel, a thorn in the side of the galaxy. Back on the bridge of the Strix, alarms shrieked. "Captain, massive energy reading," Kai yelled, his face pale with terror. "It's blooming from the heart of the nebula." On the main view screen, the swirling gases of the Serpent's Veil were being pushed aside by an emerging form. It wasn't a ship. It was a biological entity, a living structure the size of a small moon, covered in the same pulsing, chitinous armor as the station. It was a hive, a living arc, and Outpost Chimera was being drawn towards it, a new piece being assimilated into the whole. The distress call hadn't been a warning about an old enemy's return. It had been the birth cry of something new, something far worse. The Cathar hadn't just survived humanity's greatest weapon. They had been reborn from its fire, stronger and more terrible than before. Rostova stood motionless on the bridge, the screams from the station still echoing in her ears. She watched the monstrous hive grow on her screen, a testament to humanity's hubris. Kai turned to her, his youthful idealism shattered, his eyes wide with the pure, undiluted horror of what he was witnessing. "Captain," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "What? What are your orders?" Rostova's gaze drifted to a small, isolated panel on her command console. A single, guarded switch was illuminated, the words Protocol 0 glowing in stark, crimson letters. It was a button that could end the nightmare before it truly began. A button that would turn this entire sector of space into a fleeting star. The weight of genocide, of a sin she might have to commit to save her species, settled upon her. The silence on the bridge was deafening. The only sound the frantic beating of her own heart as she stared at the switch, her hand hovering just inches away. The crimson light of the Protocol 0 switch painted Eva Rostova's face in the color of blood and last resorts, a stark illumination in the sudden, tomb-like silence of the bridge. Her fingers, steady and sure from a lifetime of command, trembled a fraction of an inch above the clear protective cover. This was the button they told you about at the Academy, the one spoken of in hushed, reverent tones, the final, arable duty of a Confederacy captain, the power to unmake a star system, to cauterize a threat at the cost of erasing everything the guilty, the innocent, the past, the future. Kai stood frozen beside her, his breath hitched in his throat, his eyes locked on the monstrous, blossoming hive on the view screen. He was waiting for her command, for the absolution of an order that would damn them all to save everyone else. But Rostova's mind was a maelstrom of cold, hard calculus, the emotional horror walled off behind decades of training. Protocol 0 was a sledgehammer, absolute and unsubtle. It would work. It would turn this nebula into a brief, brilliant star and the Cathar hive into vapor. But it was a one-shot weapon. If this hive was just one, a scout or a harbinger, then she would be wasting their ultimate deterrent on the first soldier through the door. If there were more, scattered across the galaxy, gestating in other forgotten corners, then this act would be nothing more than a pointless firework, a grand gesture that accomplished nothing but their own annihilation and alerted every other potential threat to their presence. Worse, it would be an admission of failure on a galactic scale, a confession of the sin they had tried to bury for 70 years. She needed to know what she was facing. She needed intelligence, a weakness, a strategy beyond mutual annihilation. She pulled her hand back, the crimson glow vanishing from her face, leaving her features pale and shadowed. "No," she said, her voice a low, resolute command that cut through the tension like a blade. "Not yet. Jinx, get us out of here. Maximum burn, find us a shadow to hide in." The grizzled pilot didn't need to be told twice. The Strix's singularity core screamed as she pushed it to its limits, the ship lurching with a gut-wrenching acceleration. But as they turned to flee, the nascent hive seemed to react not with pursuit, but with a chilling, intelligent curiosity. The space around them warped, a gravitic distortion that buckled the very fabric of reality. The star-dusted veil of the nebula twisted into a whirlpool, and the Strix was caught in its tide. "I'm losing her," Jinx yelled, her knuckles white on the controls as the ship groaned in protest, its structural integrity alarms beginning to shriek. "It's not a tractor beam. It's a gravity well. It's pulling us in." On the screen, the hive pulsed, and a smaller, sleeker biomechanical vessel detached itself from the main body, a predator calved from its parent. It wasn't flying towards them, it was simply appearing closer, riding the waves of distorted space like a surfer. "It's toying with us," Rostova breathed, a cold dread seeping past her defenses. "It wants to see what we are." "Kai, divert all non-essential power to the forward particle cannons. Target that smaller vessel. Give it a bloody nose." The cannons fired, twin lances of incandescent energy streaking across the distorted void. They struck the Cathar ship, and for a moment, it was engulfed in a blinding flash. But when the light cleared, the vessel was unharmed, its chitinous hull shimmering as it absorbed the energy, the red veins running through it glowing brighter, stronger. It had fed on their attack. It adapted, Kai whispered in disbelief. "It's already immune." The gravity well intensified, and a crack spider-webbed across the bridge's forward viewport. They were being torn apart. "Captain, Doctor," Thorne's voice suddenly crackled over the comm from the shuttle bay, where he was being held under guard. "Their method of spatial distortion must have a focal point. A resonance frequency. If you can overload it with a chaotic energy burst, you might be able to break its hold." Rostova didn't question how he knew. The man was a savant when it came to Cathar biology. "Jinx, eject the primary plasma conduit. Detonate it on my mark." It was a desperate move, a maneuver that would cripple their primary weapon systems but flood the immediate area with raw, untamed energy. Jinx complied instantly, her fingers flying across her console. A magnetic bottle containing superheated plasma was ejected from the ship's belly, hurtling towards the point between them and the pursuing vessel. "Mark," Rostova commanded. The bottle's containment field collapsed, and the plasma erupted in a silent, chaotic sunburst of pure energy. The effect was immediate. The gravitic well wavered, its hold faltering as it was battered by the unpredictable storm of particles. "Now!" Jinx roared, slamming the throttle forward. The Strix shot out of the trap, its engine screaming as it clawed its way back into normal space, leaving the stunned Cathar vessel behind. The escape was not clean. The ship was a wreck, its port side scorched, its systems flickering, the crack in the viewport a constant, sci-fying reminder of how close they had come to oblivion. They limped into the deep, empty space beyond the nebula, a wounded animal fleeing a predator it could not comprehend. Rostova's report to Fleet Command was met with a wall of horrified silence. She transmitted everything the logs from Outpost Chimera. The sensor readings of the Hive, the combat data showing a Cathar ship that could eat a particle cannon blast for breakfast. She stood on her bridge, the image of a stern, unyielding admiral filling her main screen. It was Admiral Marcus Thorne, a man whose career was built on the victory of the Scythe War, a man whose legacy was the Ashfall pathogen, and, as fate's cruel irony would have it, the father of the now-deceased Dr. Eris Thorne. "Captain Rostova," the admiral began, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You are aware of the penalty for transmitting a falsified high-threat report." Rostova's jaw tightened. "Admiral, with all due respect, every word of my report is true. I saw it with my own eyes. Your son is dead, sir. He and the entire crew of Outpost Chimera were consumed. The Cathar have evolved. The pathogen failed." The admiral's face was a mask of granite, but a flicker of pain crossed his eyes at the mention of his son. "The pathogen did not fail, Captain. It was a complete success. The Cathar are extinct. What you encountered was a biological anomaly, a freak mutation, nothing more. A localized threat that you will contain. A threat that is currently incubating in a living ship the size of a moon," Rostova countered, her voice sharp. "A threat that can manipulate gravity and adapt to our weapons in seconds. Sir, this is not a containment situation. This is a prelude to an invasion. We need to mobilize the fleet." "Absolutely not," Thorne snapped, his composure cracking. "Do you have any idea the panic that would cause the political fallout? The other species in the galaxy would see it as a confession that we lied about the Cathar extinction, that humanity's great victory was a sham. They would see us as weak, vulnerable. Our treaties would collapse overnight. No, Captain, this problem remains in the shadows. Your ship, the Strix, was designed for this. You are a Ghost-class vessel. You will handle this quietly." "Handle it with what, Admiral?" Rostova demanded, her frustration boiling over. "My ship is half dead. My main cannons are slag, and my crew has just witnessed something that defies every law of biology and warfare we know. What are your orders?" The Admiral was silent for a long moment, the weight of his own terrible legacy pressing down on him. He had helped create the weapon that had saved humanity, and now he was being told that same weapon had birthed a new apocalypse. His denial was a shield, but even he could not ignore the data streaming from the Strix. "There was a failsafe," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "Project Nightshade. It was a second-generation counter-agent to the Ashfall pathogen, designed in the final days of the war. It was never deployed. It's a targeted enzyme that attacks the specific mutated protein bonds the Ashfall virus creates. If what you say is true, if this new form of Cathar is a product of the pathogen, Nightshade is the only thing that might stop it." He transmitted a set of encrypted coordinates. They pointed to a desolate sector of the Outer Rim, a place known only as the Ash Heap, a graveyard for decommissioned warships. The Nightshade research was conducted at a black site, Station Moros. It was abandoned after the war. The prototypes should still be there, cryo-stored in the main laboratory. Your mission, Captain, is to proceed to Moros, retrieve the Nightshade agent, and find a way to deploy it against the Hive. You will maintain absolute communication silence. You will not engage any other vessels. As far as the Confederacy is concerned, the TCS Strix was lost with all hands in the Serpent's Veil. You are on your own." The transmission ended, leaving Rostova alone on her battered bridge with an impossible mission and a ghost for a ship. The weight of the galaxy had settled squarely on her shoulders. She looked around at her crew. Jinx was coaxing the damaged engines, her face a mask of grim determination. Kai was at his station, his youthful confidence replaced by a hollow-eyed seriousness. He had seen the truth of the universe, and it had broken something inside him. Rostova knew she had to hold them together, to forge this shattered crew into the weapon the Admiral expected them to be. "Jinx," she said, her voice steady again, a rock in the swirling sea of fear. "What's our status?" The pilot grunted. "We're bleeding atmosphere from 3 decks. The port impulse engine is a glorified paperweight, and I'm pretty sure our navigation system is trying to tell me a joke in a language that hasn't been spoken for 1,000 years. But the singularity core is stable. We can move. It'll be slow, and it won't be pretty, but we can move. Then set a course for the ash heap," Rostova ordered. As the Strix began its slow, painful journey across the void, a final, delayed report filtered in from a long-range listening post near the Serpent's Veil, a message relayed on a time-lagged, quantum-entangled comm channel. It was a ghost of a message, an echo from hours ago, but its contents were chillingly clear. The listening post had tracked the Cathar Hive's trajectory as it left the nebula. It wasn't moving randomly. It wasn't expanding or scouting. It was moving with a terrifying, deliberate purpose, on a direct and unwavering course. Its destination, the Tyrannus sector, a region of space containing 6 inhabited planets, dozens of moons and colonies, and over 20 billion human souls. The birth cry from Outpost Chimera had been a signal. The Hive wasn't just awake, it was hungry, and it was heading for the nearest buffet. The ash heap was aptly named. It was a cosmic boneyard, a silent, sprawling graveyard where the steel ghosts of the Confederacy's past came to die. Hulks of decommissioned dreadnoughts, carriers, and cruisers drifted in a slow, solemn ballet of decay, their hulls scarred with the plasma burns and railgun impacts of battles long past. This was a place of ghosts and memories, a monument to the price of victory. Navigating the debris field was a nightmare, especially for a ship as wounded as the Strix. Jinx piloted with a surgeon's precision, weaving through the metallic carcasses with inches to spare, her usual cynical commentary replaced by a tense, focused silence. Every creak of their own ship's battered hull was a reminder of their fragility, an echo of the silent screams of the dead ships surrounding them. Station Moros was a needle in a haystack of galactic proportions. It was a small and asteroid-anchored black site, designed to be invisible. It had no transponder, no running lights, and its hull was coated in the same sensor-baffling material as the Strix. Finding it required them to follow Admiral Thorne's archaic navigation data, a series of gravimetric and pulsar alignments that were more celestial map-making than modern astrogation. For 3 days, they crept through the graveyard, the silence and the oppressive proximity of so much dead metal weighing heavily on the crew. It was on the 3rd day that Kai, his face gaunt and his eyes shadowed from lack of sleep, and picked up the anomaly. "Captain," he said, his voice a low, nervous hum. "I'm detecting intermittent power fluctuations from that cluster of derelicts ahead. Faint, but they're there. They're not ghost signals. It's a reactor. On standby." Rostova's blood ran cold. Derelict ships didn't have active reactors. They were gutted, their cores removed to prevent exactly this kind of discovery. "Is it Moros?" "No," Kai replied, his fingers flying across the sensor panel. "The signature is wrong. It's a Reaper-class destroyer, the Hades. She was reported lost during the siege of Cygnus X-1, presumed destroyed. A ghost ship, alive in a field of the dead. The implications were chilling. Are they hailing us? Negative, they're running silent, just like us. But they've seen us. Captain, I'm picking up the faintest trace of a targeting lock. The bridge crew froze. They were exposed, wounded, and in no condition to fight. The Hades was a warship from a bygone era, a brutal, ugly vessel built for frontline attrition, but it was still a predator. Jinx, find us cover, Rostova ordered, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Get us inside the hull of that dead carrier. The pilot nodded grimly, guiding the Strix towards the colossal, broken shell of a supercarrier, its flight bay a gaping wound large enough to swallow their ship whole. As they slipped into the shadows of the dead giant, a voice crackled over the comm, a tight band, encrypted channel that was old military spec, designed to be untraceable. Ghost ship, this is Captain Valerius of the Confederate warship Hades. You are a long way from home and running dark. Identify yourself, or I will put a torpedo through your spine. The voice was gravelly, laced with a weary authority. This was not a standard patrol. This was someone who owned this graveyard. Rostova weighed her options. Firing back was suicide. Running was impossible. That left the truth, or a version of it. This is Captain Rostova of the TC Strix, she replied, her voice steady and clear. We are on a classified mission under direct orders from Fleet Command. Our ship sustained heavy damage in the Serpent's Veil. We are not a threat. A long, tense silence followed. The targeting lock remained. Then the voice returned, tinged with a dark amusement. The Serpent's Veil. No one comes back from the Veil, and Fleet Command doesn't send ships to this junkyard. They send things here to be forgotten. Things like us. You have 30 seconds to power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded, Captain, or we'll see how well your classified mission holds up to a full plasma barrage. Rostova's jaw clenched. They were caught. Comply, she ordered her crew. The boarding party from the Hades was not what she expected. They were specters, old sores, clad in aging, heavily modified combat armor, their movements fluid and practiced. They were veterans, hard-bitten soldiers who moved with the quiet confidence of men who had seen the worst the galaxy had to offer and survived. Their leader, a mountain of a man with a scarred face and cold, intelligent eyes, introduced himself only as Valerius. He stood on the bridge of the Strix, his gaze sweeping over the damage, the cracked viewport, the exhausted crew. He didn't look like a pirate. He looked like a soldier who had never stopped fighting a war. So, the rumors are true, Valerius said, his voice a low rumble as he studied Rostova. The Admiralty is finally dusting off its skeletons. You're here for Nightshade, aren't you? Rostova's carefully constructed composure was shattered. How do you know about that? Valerius let out a short, humorless laugh. Because I was the one who was supposed to guard it. My crew, the men on this ship, we are the ghosts of Station Moros. When the war ended, Fleet Command couldn't just decommission the project. Nightshade was too dangerous, too politically volatile, so they decommissioned us instead. They declared the Hades lost in battle, wiped our records, and left us here to rot, to guard their dirty little secret until the end of time. The truth was a gut punch. These men weren't pirates. They were exiles, a phantom crew bound by a forgotten duty. Valerius and his men had been the security detail for the Nightshade project, and when it was shuttered, they had been deemed too knowledgeable to be allowed back into civilian life. We saw your report to Thorn, Valerius continued, his eyes hardening. "We monitor all deep space military comms. The old admiral is a fool. He's trying to keep a lid on a volcano. He has no idea what he's up against, but we do. We saw the data from your encounter. This new Cathar. It's what Dr. Alistair, the project's lead scientist, always feared." He led Rostova and a small contingent of her crew, including a now subdued Kai, over to the Hades. The ship was a relic, but a meticulously maintained one. Its corridors were clean, its systems humming with a quiet efficiency. It was a warship kept in a constant state of readiness for a battle that was never supposed to come. In the ship's briefing room, Valerius brought up a series of old, unclassified files on a holographic display. They showed a gaunt, intense man with feverish eyes, Dr. Alistair. Alistair was a genius, but he was paranoid, Valerius explained. He saw the ashfall pathogen not as a silver bullet, but as a Pandora's box. He theorized that if the virus didn't achieve a 100% sterilization rate, it could act as an evolutionary accelerant, a catalyst. It would force the Cathar to adapt, to become something more. Nightshade wasn't just a counteragent, it was his desperate attempt to build a cage for the monster he knew he was helping to create. He pulled up a final, chilling log entry from Alistair, recorded just before the station was shut down. "The mutation won't just make them stronger." Alistair's voice, thin and reedy, echoed in the room. "It will make them smarter. The old Cathar were a force of nature, a mindless swarm. This new form will have a consciousness, a singular, malevolent intelligence. It will remember us. It will hate us. And it won't stop until it has scoured our memory from the stars." Valerius shut off the log. "Thorn thinks you're going to retrieve a simple biological agent, a few vials of enzyme, but Alistair's final design was far more ambitious." He led them to Station Moros, a dark, silent structure clinging to the side of a massive asteroid. The station was cold, powered only by the Hades auxiliary reactors. Inside, it was a time capsule from the end of the war. Datapads lay on tables. Coffee cups sat in their rings. A game of chess was left unfinished, a scene of sudden, quiet abandonment. In the main lab, they found it. It wasn't a vial. It was a massive, intricate device, a resonance chamber the size of a shuttle, filled with a swirling, golden liquid. "Nightshade isn't a payload you fire," Valerius explained, his voice filled with a grim reverence. "It's a frequency. Alistair discovered that the mutated Cathar's biology, its ability to adapt and regenerate, was tied to a unique quantum resonance, a kind of psychic frequency that connected the entire hive. The liquid in this chamber, when energized by a singularity core, doesn't release a chemical. It releases a wave of pure, targeted energy, a death frequency tuned specifically to that resonance. It won't just kill them. It will unravel them at a subatomic level, turning their greatest strength into their ultimate undoing." Kai stared at the device, a glimmer of hope returning to his eyes. "So it's a superweapon. We can win." "It's not that simple," Valerius countered, his expression grim. "The device requires a massive power source to activate, a direct link to a ship's singularity core, and it has a limited range. To use it, you have to get within point-blank range of the hive. It's a suicide mission. Worse, the device is incomplete." Alistair was in the middle of calibrating the final focusing lens when the project was shut down. Without that lens, firing the weapon would be like setting off a bomb with no barrel. The energy wave would be undirected, a chaotic burst that would likely destroy us along with the target, and might not even be strong enough to finish the job. Their hope turned to ash. They had found their silver bullet, only to learn that the gun was broken. "Where is the lens?" Rostova asked, her voice tight. "Alistair suspected Thorn would shut him down," Valerius said. "He was paranoid. Remember, he didn't trust the Admiralty. He hid his most critical research, including the schematics and the prototype focusing lens. He scattered the data across 3 separate, encrypted data caches hidden on remote outposts, thinking no one would ever be able to piece it all together." Valerius brought up a star chart. 3 locations were marked, scattered across the lawless, pirate-infested sectors of the Outer Rim. "We've spent the last 70 years trying to find them," he admitted, a note of weary frustration in his voice. "We found the first 2. The last one. It's in a place even we don't dare to go. The Serpent's Maw. A black market hub run by the galaxy's worst scum. A place where a Confederacy warship would be torn apart for scrap before it even cleared the docking bay." Suddenly, a klaxon blared through the Hades. A shrill, insistent alarm. A crewman's voice shouted over the intercom, laced with panic. "Captain Valerius long-range sensors. We have an incoming fleet. It's the Terranus Sector Defense Fleet. They're broadcasting on all channels. They're declaring the Hive a first contact situation. They're trying to... My God, they're trying to communicate with it." Rostova and Valerius exchanged a look of pure horror, while they had been hunting for a ghost weapon in a graveyard. The Confederacy, in its arrogance and denial, had just sent a welcome party to the apocalypse. They were about to watch 20 billion people pay the price for Admiral Thorn's refusal to believe his own sins had come back to haunt him. The bridge of the Hades became a theater of impending doom. On the main view screen, filtered through a long-range, tachyonic relay, the tragedy in the Tyrannus sector unfolded in cold, clinical detail. The Confederacy fleet, a proud assembly of cruisers and destroyers, approached the Cathar Hive not with weapons charged, but with communication lasers active, broadcasting the universal mathematical language of first contact prime numbers, that is, atomic structures. The Pythagorean theorem. It was a gesture of peace, a textbook application of protocol for encountering a new, unknown intelligence. To the Cathar, it was the ringing of a dinner bell. Valerius stood beside Rostova, his face a mask of cold fury, his knuckles white where he gripped the command console. "Fools," he spat, the word a venomous whisper. "They're greeting a tidal wave with a polite handshake. Thorn is going to get them all killed." The Cathar Hive did not respond with mathematics. It responded with biology. A cloud of smaller, spore-like organisms, no larger than fighter craft, erupted from its surface. They didn't fire weapons, they simply swarmed, a living, chittering tide that engulfed the lead Confederacy cruiser. For a moment, the cruiser's point defense cannons flickered to life, a desperate attempt to swat away the gnats. Then, its lights flickered and died. The ship went dark, its reactor signature vanishing from the tactical display. It hung in the void, a dead thing. "What happened?" Kai asked, his voice trembling. "They didn't fire on it." "They didn't have to," Valerius growled. "Those aren't attack drones. They're leeches, biomechanical organisms designed to attach to a ship's hull and drain its power directly. They're literally eating the ship's energy." The other Confederacy ships, realizing their catastrophic error, began to open fire. Beams of plasma and particle energy slammed into the Hive, but it was like throwing stones at a mountain. The Hive's surface rippled, absorbing the energy. The red, vein-like structures on its chitinous hide glowing with stolen power. It was feeding on their defiance. Then, the Hive struck back. It didn't use cannons or missiles. A wave of pure, psionic energy, a silent scream that traveled through the void, washed over the fleet, on the bridge of the Hades, even hundreds of light years away. The crew flinched as a ghost of that scream echoed through the relay. The effect on the Tyrannus fleet was instantaneous and horrifying. Shipboard cameras showed crews turning on one another in a sudden, homicidal frenzy. Captains shot their helmsmen. Engineers overloaded their own reactors. It was chaos, a fleet-wide wave of madness that turned every ship into a self-destructing tomb. Within minutes, the Tyrannus sector defense fleet ceased to exist, its remnants a cloud of expanding fireballs and crippled, silent hulks. The Hive began to move towards the sector's primary planet, Tyrannus Prime, its 20 billion inhabitants now utterly defenseless. The broadcast ended as the relay station was presumably destroyed. A profound, sickening silence filled the bridge. The cold, calculated brutality of the attack, the sheer alien nature of the Cathar's warfare, was beyond anything they had ever conceived. "Thorn has to see this," Rostova said, her voice hollow. "He can't deny it now." "He will," Valerius countered grimly. "He'll classify the reports, blame it on a freak stellar phenomenon, a mutiny, anything to avoid admitting the truth. The Confederacy is an empire built on the myth of its own infallibility. Admitting we created the monster at our door is a truth it cannot survive." He turned to her, his cold eyes filled with a new, desperate urgency. "We are on our own. Tyrannus has days, maybe a week, before that thing starts to harvest it. We have to get that lens." The plan was insane. A multi-pronged assault on the galaxy's criminal underbelly. Rostova, with the stealthy whites crippled Strix, would make a run for the Serpent's Maw. Her mission was to get in, acquire the data cache containing the lens schematics, and get out. She would have to go in without the ship, a lone operative in a den of vipers. Valerius and the Hades would take the 2 data caches they had already recovered and head for a hidden, deep space foundry, a relic from the Scythe War that still had the facilities to fabricate the complex crystalline structure of the focusing lens. Kai, to his own surprise, was assigned to go with Valerius. "The boy has seen too much," Valerius told Rostova in private. "He needs to see that there's still a way to fight back, a way to build a weapon, not just watch people die. He needs a purpose, or the fear will eat him alive." Jinx, with a skeleton crew, would take the Strix to a pre-arranged rendezvous point, a dead moon in an uninhabited system, and wait. The risk of splitting up was immense, but it was their only chance. "The Serpent's Maw," Valerius said Beitse, handing Rostova a data chip and a set of civilian credentials, "is controlled by a syndicate boss named Xylar. He's a collector of rare pre-war technology. Alistair, in his paranoia, encrypted the data cache to look like a worthless, corrupted data core from an old colony ship. The Odyssey, Xylar has it, thinks it's a curiosity. You'll need to get into his private vault to retrieve it." "And how do I do that?" Rostova asked. "Xylar hosts a high-stakes sabacc tournament every cycle. The prize is a personal tour of his collection. The buy-in is 1,000,000 credits." Rostova stared at him. "We're a ghost ship crewed by exiles. We don't have 1,000,000 credits." Valerius smiled, a rare, wolfish expression. He gestured to the vast graveyard of ships around them. "No, we don't. But we have a junkyard full of pre-war military-grade reactor components, targeting sensors, and navigation computers. To a man like Xylar, that's better than cash." Rostova's journey to the Serpent's Maw was a descent into a different kind of darkness. She traveled in a cramped, stinking freighter, a smuggler's vessel Valerius had on retainer, her identity a carefully crafted fiction of a disgraced prospector looking for a big score. The Maw itself was a hollowed-out asteroid, a labyrinth of neon-lit tunnels, crowded markets, and shadowy cantinas. It was a place where every species in the galaxy came to buy, sell, or disappear. And the only law was the whim of the highest bidder. Xylar's casino, the Gilded Cage, was the heart of the Maw, a monument to greed and vice. Rostova, using the credits from the salvaged parts, bought her way into the Sabak tournament. She was a fish out of water, a disciplined military officer in a room full of professional gamblers, grizzled mercenaries, and information brokers with eyes that missed nothing. But years of command had taught her how to read people, how to mask her intentions behind a facade of cool indifference. She played conservatively, her military mind analyzing probabilities and betting patterns, her expression an unreadable mask. She bluffed, folded, and slowly, methodically, built her stack of chips. The final hand came down to her, and a hulking, four-armed warlord from a species known for their aggression and their lack of subtlety. The pot was immense, the tension in the room so thick it was a physical force. Rostova held a mediocre hand, a pair of nines. The warlord grinned, revealing a set of razor-sharp teeth, and pushed his entire stack into the pot. It was a power play, an act of pure intimidation. Rostova looked at her cards, then at the warlord's smug, triumphant face. She remembered the faces of her crew on the Strix, the hollow-eyed terror of Kai, the grim determination of Jinx. She thought of the 20 billion souls on Tyrannus Prime, blissfully unaware of the shadow that was falling over their world. This wasn't about cards. It was about buying her species a chance to live. She met the warlord's gaze, her own eyes like chips of ice, and pushed all her chips forward. "Call." The warlord's grin faltered. He revealed his hand, 3 aces. A winning hand, almost unbeatable. The room let out a collective gasp, but before the dealer could push the pot to him, Rostova laid down her own cards. "Idiot's array," she said calmly. It was the rarest hand in Sabak, a hand so statistically improbable it was considered a myth by most players, a 2, a 3, and the idiot card, the 0, a hand that beat everything. The warlord stared, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief, before letting out a roar of fury and flipping the table. Xylar's guards were on him in a second, dragging him away. Xylar himself, a slender, reptilian creature in an immaculate silk suit, slithered over to Rostova, a thin, appreciative smile on his face. "A remarkable display of nerve, my dear," he hissed. "You have earned your prize." He led her into his private vault, a museum of technological marvels and historical artifacts. And there, sitting on a velvet pedestal, was a tarnished, unassuming data core with the emblem of the colony ship Odyssey still faintly visible, while Xylar was distracted, showing off a captured Cathar warrior claw from the old war. Rostova palmed the data core, swapping it with a worthless counterfeit Valerius had provided. As she was leaving, her mission apparently a success, an alarm blared through the vault. Xylar's smile vanished. A silent security scan just identified you. Captain Eva Rostova of the Terran Confederacy ship Strix, he hissed, his eyes narrowing to slits. It seems my prize was more valuable than I thought. The Confederacy has a standing bounty on all its ghost ship personnel, a bounty I now intend to collect. And doors slammed shut, and a dozen heavily armed guards surrounded her, their weapons leveled at her head. She was trapped, deep in the heart of the galaxy's most dangerous cesspool, her cover blown, and her only hope for saving humanity locked away in her pocket. The heavy blast doors of the vault hissed shut, sealing Eva Rostova in a cage of priceless artifacts and imminent death. Xylar's guards advanced, their movements economical and deadly, the barrels of their pulse rifles unwavering. Her mind, a machine honed for tactical analysis, processed the situation in a fraction of a second. 12 hostiles, enclosed space, no cover, single exit blocked. The odds were not just poor, they were non-existent. A standing bounty, Xylar repeated, savoring the words as he backed away from the confrontation. Admiral Thorn is surprisingly generous when it comes to burying his mistakes. A pity you had to be one of them, Captain. Mistake. The word struck a chord in Rostova's mind. She looked past the guards, her gaze falling on the pedestal where the Cathar warrior claw rested, a relic of a past mistake that had bloomed into a present-day apocalypse. It was a piece of the enemy, a fragment of the Hive, and the Hive was a psychic entity. It was an insane, desperate gamble, a theory based on a dead man's paranoid ramblings, but it was the only card she had left to play. You're right, Xylar, she said, her voice dropping, taking on a conspiratorial tone. Thorn made a mistake, but not the one you think. He didn't just abandon a ghost ship. He abandoned the only weapon that can stop what's coming. That data core isn't a curiosity. It's a death warrant. For all of us. Xylar paused, his greed warring with his survival instinct. The guards hesitated, their focus momentarily disrupted. It was the opening she needed. In a single, fluid motion, Rostova drew her sidearm, not at the guards, but at the Cathar artifact. She didn't fire. Instead, she jammed the weapon's power cell coupling against a live energy conduit running along the display case. The sidearm safety protocols shrieked as raw, unfiltered power surged into its plasma generator. The weapon glowed, then buckled, but not before it had channeled a massive jolt of energy directly into the alien claw. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the claw, dead for 70 years, twitched. A low hum filled the air, a sound that wasn't heard with the ears but felt in the bone, and a wave of pure psychic malice erupted from the artifact. The guards screamed. They were mercenaries, their minds fortified against pain and fear, but not against a direct psionic assault. They staggered back, clutching their heads, their rifles firing wildly as their motor control failed. Xylar shrieked, a high-pitched sound of terror as the alien consciousness, a faint echo of the main hive, brushed against his mind. The vault, a place of quiet, ordered collection, became a maelstrom of chaos. Rostova was not immune. The psychic scream lanced into her skull, a chorus of alien hatred and hunger. But she was a soldier who had stared into the abyss of the Serpent's Veil. She had seen the hive. Her mind was shielded by the cold, hard wall of her duty. She grit her teeth, pushed through the pain, and moved. She disarmed the nearest staggering guard, her movements a blur of brutal efficiency, using his body as a shield. She fought her way to the door controls. The vault hissed open, revealing a casino in chaos as the psychic wave washed over its patrons. She didn't look back. She melted into the panicked crowds, the stolen data core clutched tightly in her hand. A single, desperate thought driving her forward, get to the rendezvous. Meanwhile, hundreds of light years away, the Hades arrived at the foundry. It was a place of forgotten power, a massive, automated shipyard built into a rogue planetoid, powered by a geothermal tap into its molten core. Here, during the war, humanity had churned out warships like sausages. Now, it was a silent giant. Valerius and his crew brought it back to life, its dormant forges glowing with renewed purpose. Kai, no longer a fresh-faced officer, but a man forged in the crucible of horror, worked alongside them. He helped Valerius's engineers interface the old foundry's systems with the Nightshade device, prepping the resonance chamber. His mind focused on the intricate problem of power flow dynamics, a welcome distraction from the fragmented, horrifying distress calls that Valerius insisted on piping into the command center. They were listening to the death of Tyrannus Prime, a symphony of screams and static that served as a relentless, ticking clock. Rostova's escape from the Maw was a bloody, desperate affair. She stole the ship of the warlord she had humiliated, blasting her way out of the asteroid's docking bay with pursuers hot on her tail. She pushed the stolen ship to its limits, its engine screaming as she made a series of reckless, short-range FTL jumps, a tactic that played havoc with navigation but made her impossible to track. She arrived at the rendezvous point, a dead moon orbiting a dead gas giant, to the welcome sight of the crippled but waiting Strix. The moment she was aboard, she transmitted the lens schematics. At the foundry, the final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. The automated forges roared to life, shaping a crystalline matrix of impossible complexity. Light and energy danced as the focusing lens was born, a perfect instrument of targeted annihilation. The moment it was finished, Valerius's crew integrated it into the Nightshade device. Their weapon was complete. Their hope had a name. The question was, who would deliver it? The Hades will take it, Valerius said, his voice leaving no room for argument. My crew and I were sentenced to guard this weapon. It's only fitting we be the ones to use it. Our final duty. No. Rostova's voice cut through the calm from the bridge of the Strix. You and your men are the living history of this conflict. You are the truth the Confederacy tried to bury. You need to survive, to tell the galaxy what happened here. The Strix will go. It's a ghost ship. This is a ghost mission. A heavy silence settled over the two bridges. Jinx, standing beside Rostova, gave a single slow nod. She's right, Valerius, the pilot said, her voice rough with emotion. Let the ghosts finish the job. The transfer was made. The massive Nightshade device was carefully maneuvered into the Strix's main cargo bay, a heart of gold and crystal transplanted into a dying body. The device was jury-rigged directly to the ship's singularity core, a connection so volatile that Kai warned it would cause a catastrophic overload the moment they fired it. The Strix had become a guided missile, its only purpose to reach its target and cease to exist. The final run was a descent into hell. As the Strix approached Tyrannus Prime, the scale of the horror became clear. The Hive was latched onto the planet, vast energy tendrils siphoning the atmosphere, the oceans, life itself. The planet was dying, its surface shrouded in a sickly brown haze. The moment they entered the system, the Hive responded. Swarms of the adapted Cathar vessels surged towards them, but they were not alone. The Hades, a relic of a forgotten war, charged into the fray, its cannons blazing. Valerius and his phantom crew, exiles no more, fought with the fury of men who had waited 70 years for this one final battle. They tore a path through the Cathar swarm, a shield of honor for the Strix. Go! Valerius's voice boomed over the comm, punctuated by the thunder of his ship's cannons. For the fallen, for the future. Rostova and Jinx plunged the Strix into the breach. The ship shuddered and screamed as energy weapons and biological projectiles tore at its hull. Consoles exploded, and the ship's structure groaned under the strain. They were flying through a storm of pure death. The Hive's psionic scream intensified, a wave of absolute terror that hammered at their minds. Jinx cried out and slumped against her console, unconscious. Rostova was alone. She could see the heart of the Hive now, a pulsating, organic core where the stolen energy of a world was being focused. With blood streaming from her nose and her vision tunneling, she locked the navigation on a collision course and crawled, hand over hand, into the cargo bay. To the weapon, she reached the activation panel, her fingers fumbling with the controls. The final sequence was a direct singularity link. There was no timer, no escape. Her hand hovered over the final switch. She thought of Valerius's sacrifice, of Kai's stolen innocence, of Jinx's unyielding loyalty. She thought of the silence that would follow, the price of survival. "This is Captain Eva Rostova," she whispered into the ship-wide comm, a final log entry for a ship that would have no grave. "The mission is complete." She flipped the switch. Light, pure and golden and absolute, erupted from the Strix. It was not the fire of an explosion, but the clean, divine light of unraveling. The nightshade frequency washed over the Hive, a perfect note of death in the symphony of life. The psionic scream of the Hive turned from a roar of rage to a shriek of agony, and then, blessedly, to silence. The chitinous armor dissolved, the biomechanical structures turning to dust. The great, moon-sized entity crumbled, its stolen life force returning to the void as harmless radiation. Aboard the distant bridge of the Hades, battered but intact, Kai watched the monster die. He saw the Strix vanish in a wave of golden light that momentarily washed the dying world of Tyrannus Prime in the color of a sunrise. In the aftermath, the truth could not be contained. The testimony of Valerius and his crew, backed by the undeniable data from the Hades logs, shattered the Confederacy's carefully constructed lies. Admiral Thorne was disgraced, the government collapsed, and a new, humbled humanity was forced to confront the sins of its past. Kai, no longer a boy, stood on the bridge of a new ship, a vessel dedicated not to war, but to vigilance. He looked out at the stars, the silence of the void no longer a lie, but a fragile peace. It was a peace bought by the sacrifice of ghosts, a peace he and a new generation would be sworn to protect. The war was over. The vigil had just begun.